Hello everybody and welcome to the Embassy of Ireland in London for Bloomsday 2021, a day of commemoration for one of Ireland's most eminent expatriates, the literary icon James Joyce. It is an anniversary also of an event that never actually happened, or at least only happened in Joyce's imagination. On that fictional day, the 16th of June 1904, the events of Ulysses take place. Joyce tells the story of a journey through Dublin in epic terms, full of colourful characters, such as Leopold Bloom. Because we Irish love an anniversary, even a fictional one, we gather each year on the 16th of June to share our enthusiasm for Ulysses and all matters Joycean. This takes many forms: readings from Joyce, dressing up in late Victorian costume, preparing unappetizing menus that are listed in Ulysses, singing songs beloved of Joyce, and even partaking in high-minded pub crawls. As we cannot yet gather in person, our embassy offering for Bloomsday 2021 is a virtual session. We invited a small band of wonderful creatives to come together and do a socially distant Joycean turn, both in words and song, to mark the day. I'm delighted that acclaimed Irish actors Niall Buggy, Adrian Dunbar, Denise Gough and Caoimhe O'Malley have accepted that invitation, and that Eamonn Mulhall will add his tenor voice to the proceedings. Our merry group will be elegantly compared by author, academic and broadcaster Emma Dabiri. Thank you all. Joyce wrote Ulysses at the beginning of the 20th century, when massive technological changes were underway, including the first flight of the Wright brothers and the advent of the gramophone and the cinema. He was thus no stranger to the modern world and would probably have embraced this virtual 21st century celebration of his novel. Yet, I dearly hope our Bloomsday 2022 can be hosted as an in-person event, especially since next year will mark the centenary of the publication of Ulysses. And if the Irish love an anniversary, we absolutely adore a centenary. In the meantime, I leave you in the wonderful hands of Emma, Niall, Adrian, Denise, Caoimhe and Eamonn. Happy Bloomsday to you all.
Thank you, Adrian, and a warm welcome to you all at home. I'm delighted to be your compere for this celebration of Joyce's life and work. As a writer myself and a Dubliner, echoes of Joyce rebound through the city. Travelling past Leopold Bloom's birthplace every day on the way home as the car went past Clonbrassil Street, just before Harold's Cross Bridge, reading Dubliners in school, admittedly, perhaps grudgingly at first, Joyce's depictions of the city both reflected and informed my own sense of its textures. I left Dublin, as so many other young people do, looking to find both myself and adventure. Studying Black and post-colonial writing, I was struck by how many references to Joyce's writing I came across and the huge influence of this Irish writer on so many of my other literary heroes, connections I hadn't imagined. Sometimes, it seems, all roads lead back to Dublin. And so it's with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed guests for this celebration of Joyce. Adrian Dunbar is an Irish actor, screenwriter and director. Adrian received a 1993 Best Original Screenplay BAFTA nomination for his film Hear My Song. He also received a 2018 nomination for the Best Supporting Actor for his notable role as Superintendent Ted Hastings in the BBC's Line of Duty, a performance for which he was awarded Best Actor at the Irish Film and Television Awards. Caoimhe O'Malley is an Irish actress and graduate of the Gaiety School of Acting, where she received the prestigious Gaiety Theatre bursary. Caoimhe has been seen in BBC's Dublin Murders and extensively on stage, where she has most recently appeared in The Unmanageable Sisters by Deirdre Kinahan at the Abbey Theatre. Niall Buggy is an Irish actor who has worked extensively both on screen and on stage in Ireland, the UK and the US. He has performed on stage in Edna O'Brien's play Haunted, which ran in the West End, as the lead in Brian Friel's Uncle Vanya, for which he won an Irish Times Theatre Award. He also won an Olivier Award for Dead Funny and the Origin Theatre Award for Blueberry Hill. Niall has appeared on screen in Mamma Mia and Father Ted. We will also be joined during our celebrations by Irish actor Denise Gough. In 2015, Denise won the Olivier Award for Best Actress for her performance in Duncan Macmillan's People, Places and Things, which ran at the National Theatre in London. She later won a second Olivier Award for Best Supporting Actress in 2018 for her performance in Angels in America. We will also be joined by Irish tenor Eamonn Mulhall. Eamonn's operatic engagements include Narrabothe in Salome, the Wexford Festival, and a staged Messiah, Alma Viva in The Barber of Seville, and After Dido at the English National Opera. Eamonn has also appeared frequently with the RTE Concert Orchestra and National Symphony Orchestra. And now to kick things off, I'll hand over to Adrian. I believe you'll be reading something a little different to help us get the measure of the man, as seen through the eyes of another great Irish writer, Samuel Beckett.
Yes, I just thought I'd read you a few reminiscences. I mean, we're indebted really to the great James Knowlton and indeed his wife Elizabeth for these recollections that Beckett has of Joyce. I just thought it might be interesting to hear a few of those, you know. Thanks for that. Here we go. I was introduced to Joyce by Tom McGreevy. He was very friendly immediately. I remember coming back very exhausted to the École Normale, and as usual, the door was closed and I climbed over the railings. I remember that, coming back from my first meeting with Joyce. I remember walking back, and from then on we saw each other quite often. And I can still remember his telephone number. He was living near the École Militaire. I used to come down sometimes in the morning from the École Normale to the concierge, and he used to say, "Mr. Joyce, he wants you to telephone him." And I remember the concierge. He was a southerner. He used to say, "C'est girl, 80. And it was always to do with a walk or, doing something before dinner. I remember a really memorable walk on the Ile de Cygne with Joyce. And then he started his tippling. And we'd have an appointment with Nora at Fouquet's. And there was another one he used to go to at that time, not Fouquet's, Lyon's or something, such other place. I remember meeting Ezra Pound with Joyce in that restaurant. I was very flattered when Joyce dropped the Mr. Everybody was Mr. There was no Christian names, no first names. The nearest you would get to a friendly name was to drop the Mr. I was never Sam. I was always Beckett at the best. And we'd drink in any old pub or cafe, I don't remember which. He dictated some pages of Finnegan's Wake to me at one stage. And during the dictation, someone knocked on the door and I said something. I had to interrupt the dictation. But it had nothing to do with the text. And when I read it back with the phrase, "come in" it, he said, "let it stand." We shared our common background. He was at the National University, of course, and I was at Trinity, but we both took degrees in French and Italian. So that was common ground. It was his suggestion that I wrote Dante, Bruno, Vico, Joyce. I remember going to see Joyce at the hospital. He was lying on his bed, putting drops in his operated eye. There wasn't a lot of conversation between us. I was a young man, very devoted to him, and he liked me. And he used to call me if he needed something. For instance, someone to walk with him before dinner or something. And I brought him home drunk one night, but I won't go into that. I mean, he drank a lot, but in the evenings only. And I remember a party. He was a great man for anniversaries. Every year he would celebrate his father's anniversary. "Father forsaken, forgive thy son." On that occasion, he would give me a note in francs. I don't know how many francs it would be. It was a note to give to some poor down and out in memory of his father. There's a poem of Joyce's. It's part of a longer poem, but I remember the verse. "A child is born, an old man is gone. And when his father died, he was very upset." I played the piano once at Joyce's. I forget what I played, but when he had enough taken at these at-home parties, receptions at home with various friends, he would sit down at the piano and accompanying himself, he would sing with the marvellous remains of a tenor voice, bid adieu, 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 bid adieu to girlish days. I realized that Joyce had gone as far as one could in the direction of knowing more, in control of one's material. He was always adding to it. You only have to look at his proofs to see that. I realized that my own way was impoverishment, in lack of knowledge, and in taking away, subtracting rather than adding. When I first met Joyce, I didn't intend to be a writer. That only came when I found out that I was absolutely no good at teaching, when I found out that I couldn't teach. But I do remember speaking about Joyce's heroic achievement. I had a great admiration for him. That's what it was. Epic, heroic, what he achieved. And I realized that I could not go down the same road. There you have it. So that's Beckett thinking a little bit about his time with Joyce. Very, very interesting, isn't it?
Yes,
Well
it
done,
is.
that was beautiful.
A great guy. And that that walk they had on the Ile de Cygne, I read a little bit about that. I think that what was happening there was T.S. Eliot, whose poem The Wasteland is next year is the centenary of it, had just been published, and they went for a walk and they were talking, and they were amazed that the publisher actually asked T.S. Eliot to include all the references in the back of the poem. That hadn't happened before, you know. And because both of them were so smart, of course, they would easily get quite a few of those things. So they thought it was they thought it was Eliot who had kind of done it, but they didn't realize at the time it was the publisher who just said, this is too dense and too crazy. We need kind of, you know, to put some kind of reference point in the back of it. So I think that's what that particular walk was about, actually.
Yeah.
It's an amazing little, it's the Ile de Cygne, it's built, it runs up to one of the bridges in Paris, and they had to build it to split the Seine because the force of the Seine coming against the bridge would have been too strong. So they built this little island, you know, which you can walk up and down. It's very sweet.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd quite like to go now.
Yeah. Well, we'd all like to go somewhere. But we're happy enough here, you know, looking into the back of Buck House.
And I think from there we'll throw over to Denise, who'll be reading an extract from Joyce's short story, A Mother from Dubliners.
While Mr. Holohan was entertaining the Freeman man, Mrs. Carney was speaking so animatedly to her husband that he had to ask her to lower her voice. The conversation of the others in the dressing room had become strained. Mr. Bell, the first item, stood ready with his music, but the accompanist made no sign. Evidently something was wrong. Mr. Carney looked straight before him, stroking his beard, while Mrs. Carney spoke into Kathleen's ear with subdued emphasis. From the hall came sounds of encouragement, clapping and stamping of feet. The first tenor and the baritone and Miss Healy stood together, waiting tranquilly, but Mr. Bell's nerves were greatly agitated because he was afraid the audience would think he had come late. Mr. Holohan and Mr. O'Madden Burke came into the room. In a moment, Mr. Holohan perceived the hush. He went over to Mrs. Carney and spoke with her earnestly. While they were speaking, the noise in the hall grew louder. Mr. Holohan became very red and excited. He spoke volubly, but Mrs. Carney said curtly at intervals, "She won't go on. She must get her 8 guineas. Mr. Holohan pointed desperately towards the hall where the audience was clapping and stamping. He appealed to Mr. Carney and to Kathleen, but Mr. Carney continued to stroke his beard, and Kathleen looked down, moving the point of her new shoe. It was not her fault. Mrs. Carney repeated, "She won't go on without her money." After a swift struggle of tongues, Mr. Holohan hobbled out in haste. The room was silent. When the strain of the silence had become somewhat painful, Miss Healy said to the baritone, "Have you seen Mrs. Pat Campbell this week?" The baritone had not seen her, but had been told that she was very fine. The conversation went no further. The first tenor bent his head and began to count the links of the gold chain which was extended across his waist, smiling and humming random notes to observe the effect on the frontal sinus. From time to time, everyone glanced at Mrs. Carney. The noise in the auditorium had risen to a clamour when Mr. Fitzpatrick burst into the room, followed by Mr. Holohan, who was panting. The clapping and stamping in the hall were punctuated by whistling. Mr. Fitzpatrick held a few banknotes in his hand. He counted out 4 into Mrs. Carney's hand and said she would get the other half at the interval. Mrs. Carney said, "This is 4 shillings short." But Kathleen gathered in her skirt and said, "Now, Mr. Bell," to the first item, who was shaking like an aspen. The singer and the accompanist went out together. The noise in the hall died away. There was a pause of a few seconds, and then the piano was heard. The first part of the concert was very successful, except for Madame Glyn's item. The poor lady sang Killarney in a bodiless, gasping voice, with all the old-fashioned mannerisms of intonation and pronunciation which she believed lent elegance to her singing. She looked as if she had been resurrected from an old stage wardrobe, and the cheaper parts of the hall made fun of her high, wailing notes. The first tenor and the contralto, however, brought down the house. Kathleen played a selection of Irish airs, which was generously applauded. The first part closed with a stirring patriotic recitation delivered by a young lady who arranged amateur theatricals. It was deservedly applauded, and when it was ended, the men went out for the interval content. All this time, the dressing room was a hive of excitement. In one corner were Mr. Holohan, Mr. Fitzpatrick, Miss Byrne, 2 of the stewards, the baritone, the bass, and Mr. O'Madden Burke. Mr. O'Madden Burke said it was the most scandalous exhibition he had ever witnessed. Miss Kathleen Carney's musical career was ended in Dublin after that, he said. The baritone was asked what did he think of Mrs. Carney's conduct. He did not like to say anything. He had been paid his money and wished to be at peace with men. However, he said that Mrs. Carney might have taken the artistes into consideration. The stewards and the secretaries debated hotly as to what should be done when the interval came. "I agree with Miss Byrne," said Mr. O'Madden Burke. "Pay her nothing." In another corner of the room were Mrs. Carney and her husband, Mr. Bell, Miss Healy, and the young lady who had recited the patriotic piece. Mrs. Carney said that the committee had treated her scandalously. She spared neither trouble nor expense, and this was how she was repaid. They thought they only had a girl to deal with, and that therefore they could ride roughshod over her. But she would show them their mistake. They wouldn't have dared to treat her like that if she had been a man. But she would see that her daughter got her rights. She wouldn't be fooled. If they didn't pay her to the last farthing, she would make Dublin ring. Of course, she was sorry for the sake of the artistes, but what else could she do? She appealed to the second tenor, who said he thought she had not been well treated. Then she appealed to Miss Healy. Miss Healy wanted to join the other group, but she did not like to do so because she was a great friend of Kathleen's, and the Carneys had often invited her to their house. As soon as the first part was ended, Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mr. Holohan went over to Mrs. Carney and told her that the other 4 guineas would be paid after the committee meeting on the following Tuesday, and that in case her daughter did not play for the second part, the committee would consider the contract broken and would pay nothing. "I haven't seen any committee," said Mrs. Carney angrily. "My daughter has her contract. She will get £4.8 into her hand, or a foot she won't put on that platform." "I'm surprised at you, Mrs. Carney," said Mr. Holohan. "I never thought you would treat us this way." "And what way did you treat me?" asked Mrs. Carney. Her face was inundated with an angry colour, and she looked as if she would attack someone with her hands. "I'm asking for my rights." "You might have some sense of decency," said Mr. Holohan. "Might I, indeed? And when I ask when my daughter is going to be paid, I can't get a civil answer." She tossed her head and assumed a haughty voice. You must speak to the secretary. It's not my business. I'm a great fellow. Fall the diddle I do. I thought you were a lady, said Mr. Holohan, walking away from her abruptly. After that, Mrs. Kearney's conduct was condemned on all hands. Everyone approved of what the committee had done. She stood at the door, haggard with rage, arguing with her husband and daughter, gesticulating with them. She waited until it was time for the second part to begin, in the hope that the secretaries would approach her. But Miss Healy had kindly consented to play one or two accompaniments. Mrs. Kearney had to stand aside to allow the baritone and his accompanist to pass up onto the platform. She stood for an instant like an angry stone image, and when the first notes of the song struck her ear, she caught up her daughter's cloak and said to her husband, "Get a cab." He went out at once. Mrs. Kearney wrapped the cloak round her daughter and followed him. As she passed through the doorway, she stopped and glared into Mr. Holohan's face. "I'm not done with you yet," she said. "But I'm done with you," said Mr. Holohan.
Up next is Niall with an extract from Joyce's short story, The Dead, also from Dubliners.
Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness, he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near. His soul had approached that region where dwell the vast hosts of the dead. He was conscious of, but could not apprehend, their wayward and flickering existence. His own identity was fading out into a grey, impalpable world. The solid world itself, which these dead had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead.
Fair play to you, Niall.
Beautiful, yeah.
That was lovely.
Um,
Really, really lovely. What an amazing piece.
Yeah.
In a fitting pairing with Niall's reading, we now bring you to the ballroom for a musical number from Eamonn Mulhall. He'll treat us to the Lass of Aughrim. Keen Joyceans will recognise the song from The Dead as the catalyst for Greta Conroy to recall memories of her lost admirer, Michael Fury.
If you'll be the lass of Aughrim, as I'm taking you mean to be, tell me the first tone that passed between you and me. Oh, don't you remember that night on your lean hill, when we both met together, which I'm sorry now to tell. Oh, the rain falls on my heavy locks, and the dew wets my skin. My babe lies cold within my arms, but none will let me in. My babe lies cold within my arms, but none will let me in.
Thank you, Eamonn. What a stunning performance. We now return to Niall, who will bring the fireworks from Nausicaa from Ulysses to life for us.
Canon O'Hanlon put the Blessed Sacrament back into the tabernacle, and the choir sang Laudete Dominum Omnis Gentes, and then he locked the tabernacle door because the benediction was over. And Father Conroy handed him his hat to put on, and Crosscat Edie asked, wasn't she coming? But Jackie Caffrey called out, "Oh, look, sissy!" And they all looked. Was it sheet lightning? But Tommy saw too over the trees beside the church, blue and then green and purple. "It's fireworks," Sissy Caffrey said. And they all ran down the strand to see over the houses and the church. Helter-skelter, Edie with the pushcar with baby Boardman in it, and Sissy holding Tommy and Jackie by the hand so they wouldn't fall running. "Come on, Gertie," Sissy called. "It's the bazaar fireworks." But Gertie was adamant. She had no intention of being at their beck and call. If they could run like Rossies, she could sit, so she said she could see from where she was. The eyes that were fastened upon her set her pulses tingling. She looked at him for a moment, meeting his glance, and a light broke in upon her. White-hot passion was in that face, passion silent as the grave, and it had made her his. At last they were left alone without the others to pry and pass remarks, and she knew he could be trusted to the death, steadfast, a sterling man, a man of inflexible honour in his fingertips. His hands and face were working, and a tremor went over her. She leaned back far to look up where the fireworks were, and she caught her knee in her hand so as not to fall back, looking up. And there was no one to see, only him and her, when she revealed all her graceful, beautifully shaped legs like that, supply soft and delicately rounded. And she seemed to hear the panting of his heart, his hoarse breathing, because she knew about the passion of men like that, hot-blooded, because Bertha Supple told her once in dead secret and made her swear she'd never, about the gentleman lodger that was staying with them out of the congested districts board that had pictures cut out of papers of those skirt dancers and high kickers, and she said he used to do something not very nice that you could imagine sometimes in the bed. But this was altogether different from a thing like that, because there was all the difference, because she could almost feel him draw her face to his, and the first quick hot touch of his handsome lips. Besides, there was absolution so long as you didn't do the other thing before being married, and there ought to be women priests that would understand without your telling out. And Sissy Caffrey, too, sometimes had that kind of a dreamy look in her eyes, so that she too, my dear, and Winnie Rippingham, so mad about actors' photographs, and besides, it was on account of that other thing coming on the way it did. And Jackie Caffrey shouted to look. There was another, and she leaned back, and the garters were blue to match on account of the transparent, and they all saw it and shouted to look. Look, there it was, and she leaned back ever so far to see the fireworks, and something queer was flying about through the air, a soft thing to and fro, dark. And she saw a long Roman candle going up over the trees, up, and in the tense hush, they were all breathless with excitement as it went higher and higher, and she had to lean back more and more to look up after it, high, almost out of sight, and her face was suffused with a divine, an entrancing blush from straining back, and he could see her other things too, namesuke knickers, the fabric that caresses the skin better than those other petty wits, the green 4 and 11 on account of being white, and she let him, and she saw that he saw, and then it went so high, it went out of sight a moment, and she was trembling in every limb from being bent so far back. He had a full view high up above her knee. No one ever, not even on the swing or wading, and she wasn't ashamed, and he wasn't either, to look in that modest way like that, because he couldn't resist the sight of the wondrous revealment half offered, like those skirt dancers behaving so immodest before gentlemen looking, and he kept on looking. She would fain have cried to him chokingly, held out her snowy slender arms to him to come, to feel his lips laid on her white brow, the cry of a young girl's love, a little strangled cry wrung from her, that cry that had rung through the ages. And then a rocket sprang, and bang, shot blind, and oh, then the Roman candle burst, and it was like a sigh of oh, and everyone cried oh, in raptures, and it gushed out of it a stream of rain gold hair threads, and they shed, and they were all greeny, dewy stars falling with golden. Oh, so lively. Oh, so soft, sweet, soft. Then all melted away, dewily in the grey air. All was silent. She glanced at him as she bent forward quickly, a pathetic little glance of piteous protest, of shy reproach under which he coloured like a girl. He was leaning back against the rock behind. Leopold Bloom, for it is he, stands silent, with bowed head before those young, guileless eyes. What a brute he had been. At it again. A fair, unsullied soul had called to him, and wretch that he was, how had he answered? An utter cad he had been, he of all men, but there was an infinite store of mercy in those eyes. For him too a word of pardon, even though he had erred and sinned and wandered. Should a girl tell? No. 1,000 times no. That was their secret, only theirs, alone in the hiding twilight, and there was none to know of or tell, save the little bat that flew so softly through the evening to and fro. And little bats don't tell. Sissy Caffrey whistled, imitating the boys in the football field to show what a great person she was. And then she cried, Gertie, we're going, come on, we can see from farther up. Gertie had an idea, one of love's little ruses. She slipped a hand into her kerchief pocket and took out a wadding and waved in reply, of course, without letting him, and then slipped it back. Wonder if he's too far to... She rose. Was it goodbye? No. She had to go, but they would meet again there, and she would dream of that till then, tomorrow, of her dream of yestereve. She drew herself up to her full height. Their souls met in a last lingering glance, and the eyes that reached her heart, full of a strange shining, hung enraptured on her sweet flower-like face. She half smiled at him wanly, a sweet forgiving smile, a smile that verged on tears. And then they parted. Slowly, without looking back, she went down the uneven strand to Cissy, to Edie, to Jackie and Tommy Caffrey, to little baby Boardman. It was darker now, and there were stones and bits of wood on the strand and slippy seaweed. She walked with a certain quiet dignity, characteristic of her, but with care and very slowly, because Gertie MacDowell was tight boots? No. She's lame. Mr. Bloom watched her as she limped away.
Well done.
Wow.
Gorgeous.
Riveting.
Incredible.
Well, you know, I think you should get the nomination for that.
Oh,
He's
wow.
got an extraordinary...
Yeah, it's fabulous.
There's so much tension and scandal. I was really on the edge of my seat.
Especially your pace of that, Niall, was amazing. It really built it, yeah.
It's an amazing
Incredible.
man.
We're going to move on to Caoimhe now, who's going to read Molly Bloom's infamous soliloquy from Ulysses, but with a twist. This time it's from Dermot Bolger's bawdy, vibrant and tumultuous version of the book, adapted for the Abbey in 2018 by Graham McLaren. By Graham McLaren.
A little bawdy, so if any little ears are around. I'll move over, you big carcass, for the love of Mike, listen to him. And I'm to be slouching around in the kitchen to get his lordship his breakfast, will I indeed? Show them attention and they treat you like dirt. I don't care what anyone says, it'd be much better for the world to be governed by women. When do you ever see women rolling around drunk or losing every penny on horses? Yes, I think he made them a bit firmer, sucking them like that. Titties, he calls them. I had to get him to suck them, they were so hard. They're so beautiful compared with what a man looks like with his 2 bags full and his other thing hanging down out of him or sticking up at you like a hat rack. No wonder they hide it with a cabbage leaf. Oh, such an idea. Bringing Simon Dedalus' son, his father, such a criticiser. Imagine climbing over the railings. Wonder he didn't tear a big hole in his grand funeral trousers. Sweet God, when I'm stretched out dead, I suppose I'll have some peace. Oh, where's the chamber pot gone? I've got a holy horror of its breaking under me. Wonder was I too heavy sitting on his knees? Wait, there's George's church bells, 2 o'clock. That's a nice hour for him to be coming home at. I'll knock him off that little habit tomorrow. First, I'll see if he has that French letter still in his pocketbook. I suppose he thinks I don't know. I wonder what sort he is. Dedalus' son. I suppose he's a man now. He says he's an author and going to be a professor of Italian. What is he driving at, showing him my photo? I wonder he didn't make a present of it altogether, and me too. I wonder, is he too young? I'm not too old for him. I'm sure he's very distinguished. I'd like to meet a man like that. So clean compared with those pigs of men I suppose never dream of washing it. That's what gives women the moustaches. I saw him with his father and his mother. I was in mourning. That's 11 years now. Yes. Rudy'd be 11. Though what was the good of going into mourning for what was neither one thing or the other? The first cry was enough for me. I heard the death watch too, ticking in the wall. He liked me too, I remember. It wasn't my fault, but I knew well I'd never have another. Our first death. We were never the same since. Oh, I'm not going to think myself into the glooms about that anymore. What am I going to do about Boylan, though? No, he has no manners nor refinement. That ignoramus doesn't know poetry from a cabbage. That's what you get for not keeping them in their proper place. It's a wonder I'm not an old hag living with him, never embracing me except sometimes when he's asleep, the wrong end of me. Any man that'd kiss a woman's bottom I'd throw my hat at. I suppose there isn't in all creation another man with his habits. Nobody understands his cracked ideas but me. Sure, they wouldn't be in the world only for us. Where would they be if they hadn't a mother to look after them? That's why he's running wild now, out all night. I'll just give him one more chance. I'll get up early. Then I'll throw him up his eggs and tea. I'll start dressing myself to go out. I'll put on my best shifting drawers, let him have a good eyeful to make his Mickey stand. I'll let him know if that's what he wanted, that his wife is fucked. Yes, and damn well fucked too, up to me neck nearly, not by him. It's all his fault if I'm an adulteress. Oh, much about it, if that's all the harm ever we did in this vale of tears. Then if he wants to kiss my bottom, I'll drag open my drawers, I'll tighten my bottom well and let out a few smutty words. Smell rumper, lick my shitter, the first mad thing that comes into my head. Oh, wait now, sonny, it's my turn coming. You wouldn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Then yes, I'll make him want me. What an unearthly hour. I suppose they're just getting up in China now. Better lower this lamp and try again. What'll I wear? Shall I wear a white rose? I'd love to have the whole place swimming in roses. God, there's nothing like nature. The wild mountains and then the waves rushing and flowers. All sorts of shapes and colours springing up out in the ditches. The sun shines for you, he said, the day we were lying among the rhododendrons on Howth Head, the day I got him to propose to me. Yes. My God, after that long kiss, I nearly lost my breath, yes. He said I was a flower of the mountain. Yes, so we are flowers. All a woman's body. Yes, that was why I liked him, because I saw he understood or felt what a woman is. And I knew I could always get round him. And I gave him all the pleasure I could, leading him on till he asked me to say yes. And I wouldn't answer first. Only looked out over at the sea and the sky. I was thinking of so many things he didn't know of. The sailors playing on the pier and the Spanish girls laughing in their shawls and the fowl market and the poor donkeys slipping half asleep and the old castle thousands of years old, yes! And those handsome Moors all in white and turbans like kings asking you to sit down in their little bit of the shop. Oh, and the sea, crimson sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunsets. Yes, and all the queer little streets, and pink and blue and yellow houses, and the rose gardens, and the jasmine and geraniums, and Gibraltar as a girl, where I was a flower of the mountain. Yes! When I put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls used. Yes. And how he kissed me under the Moorish wall. And I thought, well him as another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again. Yes. And then he asked me, would I? Yes, to say yes, my mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breasts all perfume. Yes, and his heart was going like mad. And yes, I said yes, I will. Thank you for being my Bloom.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
It was incredible.
Lovely.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I first saw that performed by the incredible Janet Moran on the Abbey stage, and she makes anyone fall in love with her, and I think that piece made me fall in love with Joyce and Ulysses in particular, because I think it's so extraordinary that he wrote it all those years ago about a woman and from a woman's perspective. And you know, I'd imagine when it was first released, there was scandal about, you know, Molly and who she was. But, you know, it's so modern. You know, she's a fully fledged, living, breathing human with feelings and emotions and wants and needs. And, you know, obviously as a performer, I just love the breadth, you know, of that piece. But also just what he talks about and, you know, how he gives her sexuality and her opinions and a voice.
It's quite radical.
I think so, yeah.
It's also very interesting about Joyce because music was so important to him, and as you know, or you probably know, that he was a wonderful singer, and he came second in the Feis to John McCormack at one point. But and of course Nora was very upset that he didn't keep up the singing. She couldn't bear the writing. She said, you know, why didn't you stick to the singing, you know, much better. But all through the writing, one is very aware, in retrospect, of the musicality of his language. And I mean, I think that that's what makes him, or one of the things that makes him a sort of genius of observation and of rhythm, of the rhythm of life, really. He's an amazing man, wasn't he? It's also, it's beautifully innocent as well. It has a childlike innocence about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about capturing moments, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
He brilliantly captures all those moments that we just heard.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
I think that tension between the innocence and it being quite risque as well is
Yes.
interesting. And rhythm is such a good word because I was just thinking of the pacing of that, but I think the rhythm, it's the rhythm of it. Yeah, phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Huiva.
Thank you, Emma.
And we're almost at the end of our celebration. But before we go, I'd like to thank all of our participants today for their generous contributions, and thank you to Ambassador O'Neill for hosting this marvellous occasion. We hope you at home have enjoyed our little gathering, and we hope to be able to hold these type of events soon again in person. We will now return to the ballroom where Eamonn will see us out with a beautiful Italian piece marking Joyce's years spent in Trieste. Thank you and have a happy Bloomsday.
Io ti seguì come iride di pace lungo le vie del cielo. Io ti seguì come un'amica face della notte nel velo. Torna, caro ideal, torna un istante a sorridermi ancora.